Hello everyone. This is Adel Iskandar from Simon Fraser University. It's a pleasure for me to be involved in this conference. My commendations and congratulations to Will and everybody on the team at IMES for putting this together despite all the obstacles and tribulations. I'm going to try and keep this as brief as I possibly can. My presentation today is entitled Neoliberalism or Neoliberal Authoritarianism, and I'm describing it as the prevailing condition of Middle Eastern media. Since the presentations are rather brief, 5 to 7 minutes at most, a lot of the details I won't be able to arrive at. Nevertheless, I do want to give the broad brush strokes that will allow participants and attendees to be able to understand what I'm trying to get at. I'm going to share my screen now to hopefully be able to illustrate what I'm trying to do. Okay, so essentially my discussion point here is a departure from the prevailing descriptors of the various circumstances that have been at play in the Middle Eastern media landscape. And most of us are familiar with the literature from the 1960s onwards about various modalities and typologies and typographies of media around the world, with which have been described and critiqued quite extensively long before this presentation, for being a little too Western centric in their interpretation of the various nuances and contexts that exist in the multiple locales that they describe. Um, the critique, that dates back to the 1970s and 80s of the way in which the Arab media is described, has typically not rendered the discussion worthwhile when it comes to issues of post-colonial legacies and their impact on the infrastructure of broadcasting, media, and the print press across the region. And then, of course, the critique extends well beyond that with the growing sort of neoliberalization, or I should say, liberalization of the press in the region, whether it's in Lebanon, to a lesser extent in Egypt, Tunisia, and some areas in the Gulf. We began to see in the mid 1990s, with the advent of satellite television, a growing discussion about freedom of expression and freedom of the press, and oppositional politics in broadcasting in the region, which appear to disrupt the overarching and expansive description of the media in the region as predominantly authoritarian. With the arrival of the uprisings in late 2010, 2011 through to 2013, in various countries, Egypt, Libya, Syria, Yemen, and Bahrain, as well as the more contemporary uprisings or popular uprisings in Lebanon, Algeria, and the Sudan, we begin to see wider discussions about the role that media play, um, either as a propagator of popular uprising and dissidence in politics, or as a way to further entrench the status quo. And we've also seen a tremendous amount of literature about the resilience of authoritarianism, both before the uprisings and then now since 2013, with a fair amount of literature arising in the 3-year period between 2010 and 2013, which not techno-deterministic, which of course is a condition of some of the literature originating in the West, but at the very least, overly enthusiastic about the prospects of liberalization in the media and more progressive politics, and at least an openness to variety and diversity in both voices and mechanisms in media. So where I'd like to interrupt this is by looking at the various circumstances that exist in the Middle Eastern media today, in light of these various complicated transformations and the incredible particularities that are very specific, region specific, and locale specific, and subnationally specific in some instances. So while the argument that I'm making here appears to be expansive, I have intentionally avoided using the word model. So rather than calling this the prevailing model of Middle Eastern media, I'm describing it as a condition, and this condition manifests in different ways depending on various circumstances. So, what are the characteristics of this condition? Well, the condition itself is ingrained in the political economic circumstances that bring together a combination of deregulation, the import of capital, the vitality of industrialization, particularly of the extractive variety in the form of a heavy reliance on natural resources, whether that be natural gas or oil, as a main economic anchor for the state specifically, and by extension, how that manifests when it comes to media and the media landscape. With very little alternative to these primary sources of revenue for the nation state, as well as the incredible consolidation of political power in the hands of very few, whether in the monarchical sort of political structure of governance or the more seemingly democratic, or at least the participatory electoral systems that are now in place in a few countries in the region. What we've seen rise to the top is an emphasis on the role that economic circumstances inform how the media operate. There's been a fair amount of literature as of late about the incredible financial consolidation of power in the media sectors across the region, with some excellent books. One notable one is Arab Moguls, which came out a few years ago. But all of this is part of a longer legacy of the work of political economists of communication, of which there are a few operating on the Middle East and North Africa specifically. But there's been a substantial dearth, I would say, as of late, as we become more sort of consumed with the specificities of content-driven discourse. So beyond the content-driven discourse, if we take a step back and look at systems of ownership and structures of economic consolidation of power when it comes to media, we realize that the infrastructure itself is very much in the hands of very few actors. In virtually every country, and I would say there are extremely few exceptions, all media entities, predominantly in the broadcasting realm, are either owned and operated by state institutions, not in the form that we are accustomed to in the past. We understand that there's been a wave of abolition and closure of ministries of information as they become increasingly faux pas. And also, we've seen the sort of dismissal or the slow sort of disappearance into the background for the state news agencies, but they nevertheless continue to wield a substantial amount of power in the form of progenitors of discourse that then translates into broadcast content on television and online. As we sweep across the region, or I should say, like make a trip across the region or survey the region, all the way from the Gulf to the farthest ends of North Africa, we begin to notice this pattern whereby state, political state authority is becoming more entrenched, with limited opportunities for the sharing of power. And that is manifest with an incredible degree of unanimity and harmonization of media discourses in the broadcast realm, along with a focus on on progress or modernity as it manifests in one particular variety, which is economic the economic output of the state, and also in no small measure in the form of aesthetics. So the way in which the state presents itself, whether it's in the form of mega industrial projects or large infrastructure and construction projects, the production of content in essentially fortresses that pose as media cities or media facilities, and the disappearance of public spaces as a locale for not only for production but for representation. Popular opinion is limited to that which reinforces the political status quo, and in no way challenges the relationship between the centers of power and economic reach. So whether we're looking at Turkey or Egypt or Gulf countries like Saudi Arabia or Qatar or the United Arab Emirates, even though there's been a huge wave of privatization of the media, but also the incredible proliferation of various broadcast entities and media companies, many of those companies are nevertheless shackled by their relationship to state authority, and by their inability to question the economic circumstances that inform their production. How that becomes evident is in the way in which these media entities address and deal with adversity or adversarial positions. And there, in my paper, there would be a significant amount of examples of this. I should note that the discussion around neoliberal authoritarianism is growing out of an essay or a chapter I contributed to the Oxford Handbook on Contemporary Middle Eastern Politics. But this would be more focused on specific examples or case studies or circumstances. So in this case, what I'm intend to do with the slide is to create a juxtaposition of two state operated, one could have a fairly sort of long and almost Byzantine discussion over whether or not Al Jazeera and Al Arabiya are state broadcasters. But as we now have come to understand, that irrespective of their political positions and differences, they both are very much bankrolled and supported by their respective states' authorities, even though they might be communicating with varying degrees of liberty on specific issues. But especially when it comes to dealing with domestic matters, whether it's Al Jazeera or Al Arabiya, they tend to toe the line more so now than at any point probably in contemporary history. They are very much towing the state line. So this juxtaposition shows how these two broadcast entities, and this is of course from their websites, are engaged in a reaffirmation of their respective political positions vis-a-vis one another on the embargo of Qatar by various GCC countries. So on the left-hand side, we have Al Arabiya effectively looking for anything that they can say to admonish, undermine, and discredit the Qatari government and by extension, Qatari private sector ventures, in this case, Qatar Airways. And then, of course, we see on the other side of the screen, the right hand of the screen, the way in which Al Jazeera is also very much digging its heels in an attempt to undermine, discredit, and discount Saudi Arabian government and its extensions, whether that be in the form of political authority with Mohammed bin Salman, or any other sort of extension of Saudi state authority and its economic reach. So the way in which the media entities are deployed to effectively do the dirty work of the state, and become expressions of the state's foreign policy as well as domestic policy, is an affirmation of how contiguous these messages are, to the extent that they are very much in line with authoritarian conditions of media, with very few exceptions. And in addition to that, the incredible sort of matrimonial relationship between state authority and economic reach, both in the industrial, post-industrial, and in technological sectors, is a further confirmation of this this really intangible relationship that we deal with today. So this has been a very, very brief introduction to the argument that I intend to make. I hope it is well received, and I look forward to comments, feedback, and discussions. Thank you so much.